bring yourself back online. So here we are at the end of September, and we've been on quite the Westworld journey. We've seen the movie, we've seen the hosts, the humans, and the music, and all that's left is to look at the odds and ends that maybe didn't fit anywhere else, or the clever storytelling devices and clever clues that were left for us. Those of us who are particularly attentive to certain things, and maybe figured it out before the end even, can still be rewarded by going back and watching scenes from before we figured it out. And for my analysis, watching it back, once I'm fully aware and got all the information, I was rewarded quite a lot. So I've said it right at the start, and it is praiseworthy to, not only Jonathan Nolan and Lisa Joy for creating it, but any of the writers along the way, their input to it. Obviously, they're going to be guided by this sort of blueprint for the series, if you will. But they've been able to put those blueprints in, and like I say, it can be as subtle or as in your face, and it's still rewarding, which is quite a feat. So, like the music, I'm going to sort of mainly look episode order before sort of wrapping up at the end with some just general thoughts of the whole series before we say farewell for now to Westworld. I may come back and do more for season 2, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. So, in the first episode, I think one of the big things with this that was so well done, and again, like I said with the Paint It Black in the music episode, Teddy sort of seeming like he's a guest, not a host, was a way of kind of saying, here's what to expect. You're gonna think things are one way, but they're not. It's going to be an entirely different outcome to what you're expecting. And I think that was a great way to let us into that idea. There's not much more in the first episode, I think, to cover, so we'll move on. And of course we get the introduction of Logan and William in Chestnut. And there are a few hints, even at this early stage, of the Man in Black's true identity. He says to Lawrence, that they have a long history, and of course over the next episodes we will see that. But he also mentions the fact that he was born here, and as we see with William's rather tragic story, he was the version of him that we see, this embittered old thrill seeker, if you will. He wants to know what else is out there. He was born here. He's a product of this world. But we do get one hint, I think. I mean, it might just be me conjecturing here, but instead of the sheriff calling for people to help capture Hector Eschaton, we get the Union call. We get people sort of being invited to join the Union. Now, I would believe, again, it's my belief, my interpretation, I'm not saying it's fact, that the Hector thing was added after. And it's a quite interesting little key into the fact that this is a different time, but it's so subtle that you can miss it, because they could have different plot beginnings, if you will, on different days. They could have different ways of starting the day for guests coming in, so I thought that was well done. One of the other things I started to feel with this episode, obviously after seeing the first one and sort of getting a sort of warmth growing towards the hosts, is the treatment that they receive. As we see throughout the series, more so, them getting abused, really, if they were sentient human beings. We watch that, and it does get more uncomfortable as we sort of peel away the layers and see that they're actually not that different from us. And this is purely, I believe, again, an intentional idea. Show us the brutality to them, but whilst also making us feel for them, because they are meant to be the sympathetic characters, as much as some of the human characters in the show. Now in Stray, the Man in Black mentions starting at the beginning before it transitions, and that again, a clever little clue, but easily missed, because we're not meant to be thinking this is the same person at this point. There's not enough clues been left to say this is the same guy. If you figured it out already, then well done, but it's clearly there for really astute people, or for like the second viewers, who will pick up on things like that, these little clues that were being left. But there is an interesting element that's brought up in this, because the idea of the danger is sort of mentioned, the fact that it's an illusion of danger. They can get hurt in this one, it's one of the things that I think they resolved quite well from 73, the fact that the host can shoot back, you just can't be killed. And I think that was a great way to address that issue, because it just means that all of the Good Samaritan programming can be in the host, and then you can leave it open to the fact that something bad can happen without a catastrophic park failure. So I thought that was a very interesting addition into the mythos, I guess you might say. Another interesting element that I particularly picked up on, I think, was the fact that it's kind of like a living museum. The fact that the hosts will converse with each other, they'll interact with each other, even when the guests aren't around. And I know it's mentioned later on in the series, that they're kind of practicing. But I just found it interesting, because of course, in living museums and Renaissance fairs and things like that, people are playing a role, of these oldie-worldy characters or whatever. In this situation, they're just programmed to do that. Is it that different? And of course, like I say, with, them being considered as practicing so that their improvisation skills are up to par, etc. It's a nice touch, because that helps with what I was saying before about making us sympathetic to them. And of course, one of the more sympathetic hosts is Bernard. And there's a couple of things with the Bernard-Arnold situation in this episode. For one, sort of about him making Arnold's mistakes. Well, he's probably likely to. He's got his personality as a program, so that would make sense. But the thing at the end of the episode, which I believe all of these are actually with Arnold, with Dolores, and there's a very interesting question raised that I think applies to not only Dolores, but the guests as well.
Imagine there are two versions of yourself. One that feels these things and asks these questions, and one that's safe. Which would you rather be?
I mean, which would you rather be? Safe or inquisitive? That's really what it is. Obviously, as you can probably tell, I'm probably more the inquisitive rather than safe mentality. But it's a very interesting question, and it does form part of consciousness. All these little scenes are leading towards Dolores' consciousness. But that's an interesting thing to the, further on in the episode, when of course she's riding back and starts to just say the line as normal, but catches herself. This is a beginning of that evolution to true consciousness. She realises that she's just repeating a line. She doesn't need to say that, there's no one with her. It's dramatic effect. She knows that, or she's beginning to know that there's a weird reason she was compelled to say that, but not quite what it is yet. So again, that was really good sort of breadcrumbing, if you will. So there was one more element from this episode, but I think I want to cover that later on when there's a lot more to go on. For now, I'll just say the woman with the parasol. But we'll move to Dissonance Theory. So like the original, there's not much in this one. There's a couple of things like the time hopping, throughout the series, to be honest, but it's well done. Unless you are aware, once you know what's going on, you can spot the time periods. But other than that, it's so seamless that it doesn't ruin the flow. You don't think, wait a minute, nothing keys you in until either you figure it out yourself or the end. And I like that. But the other one, and I fully can see that this could be a stretch, and maybe I'm wanting something to be deeper than it is. But Bernard says to Elsie, hosts don't imagine, you do. Now, yeah, people say you do, or I do, or we do, interchangeably a lot of the time. He could have said we do, meaning people, but you do in this sense could mean people. But when we know that he's not people, someone wrote that line, is what I'm getting at. Someone chose to make the delineation between we and you in this sentence. Or they were lazy. So maybe we should just move on to Contrapasso. And this one took me on an interesting side quest through Dante's Inferno. Because at first I was like, what does Contrapasso mean? Simply put, counterpoint. But writers, as a rule, are an intelligent, well-educated bunch, and I think they meant for us to look at the Dante meaning. The explanation I saw was effectively to suffer in whatever circle of hell in a manner befitting the sin. The example I saw used was astrologers and the like being forced to walk around with their heads on backwards because they could never actually divine the future. It's not something that was actually within their power to do. So that's how they suffer. And I think that's what we're meant to take from it. It's the idea that maybe, well, as we see in episode 10, the board, and hopefully we'll see it in season 2, the less honourable guests, will suffer the same kind of fate that they've made these hosts suffer for the past 30-odd years. And it makes me even more excited, for season 2 than I was already. But that's not all with this episode. I mean, obviously that's quite a heavy, interesting, deep layer, but there is, enough in the episode without that as well. One of which is the Greyhound story. Now, yes, it does kind of link into the counterpoint idea of the title, but I think it's also an interesting analogy to, the guests themselves. They go on the hunt, they're chasing this bit of felt, but when they catch it, what do? You know, that's not the draw. They're not here to shoot or to do the other option that Westworld provides. They're here for the thrill of the chase. They're here for the journey. They're not here for the destination. So when they get there, they don't know what they're doing. It's kind of really empty at that point. So that's why perhaps they come back. They're constantly seeking the new thrill, not realising that if they just slowed down, it would probably be a lot better for them. You know, they could keep the chase going. But that idea of the chase leads me into my next point. The Man in Black again, you know, we get a little bit of him in this, but what I really wanted to touch upon is the fact of his travelling companion. Lawrence goes out of the picture. Then we meet up with Dolores, William and Logan and meet Al Lazo. There is no crossover, and that's clever. Because we would have found it hard to follow if 1 minute we're seeing Ed Harris and Lawrence, and then the other, you know, we're seeing Dolores, Logan and William with Al Lazo. How can you be in two places at once? We've never seen any evidence of any sort of twins or cloned, you know, hosts before. So it would have been difficult for us, and they've constructed it so well. He goes out the picture as Lawrence, comes back in as Al Lazo, and I love that. It's one of the things I love about the crafting of the time hopping in this. It's so well done. It's not the first or last time that I'm going to be praising the time hopping, I assure you. Now in Adversary, or Adversary, as you prefer, it's not so much sort of clever world building and time hopping things that we've got to comment on. You know, a lot of the clever stuff I've already covered in the other videos. But this is more kind of Easter eggs or nods or whatever you want to call it. The first being 7 minutes in, we see a very familiar character in the background. It looks very much like Yul Brynner's gunslinger from the movie. And I love that little nod because it is down with the older models, so it's entirely believable if you're connecting the film and the series. That's a great way to do it. But the other big one is Maeve, you know, when she's talking about her history, how she was in New Orleans for a while. Now, I am familiar with Thandie Newton's film history, her career, and I'm fully aware that she was in Interview with a Vampire, and she was in fact, the New Orleans section. I think this is intended. I do think, again, it's one of these little nice nods that they occasionally slip in, a little kind of wink to the audience. And I loved it for that. But on the subject of Thandie Newton, I mean, I'm going to talk more about, you know, the actors, particularly the ones playing the hosts, because of the wide range that a lot of them had to do. But in this episode, and really in subsequent episodes as well, you know, we start to see a very sort of calm intensity. That's one way that I can think of describe it. In Thandie Newton's performance, she was amazing. I am so enraptured with it. You know, she can be really evil and manipulative, but really calm with it. And actually, that's more scary. If you have someone just screaming and flailing, you know that they're going to burn out. But someone being cold and calculated, but you can still sense the fire underneath, that's terrifying. And she did really well. But like I say, we're not here to praise the actors just yet. That's a bit later on. So we'll move on to the next episode, Trompe l'œil. And I apologise to any French speakers out there. It's been a while since I've done French. So we'll call it optical illusion or trick of the eye moving forward. And we have the very literal interpretation of it with Bernard later on in the episode saying
Odor.
And then the confirmation for those of us who'd suspected that he was in fact a host, and that full reveal. But this is Westworld, and it's not always just about the very literal, very obvious. It's always, I think, more about what's behind meanings and behind scenes. And really the idea of this, you know, tricking the eye, stems to the whole park. I've said it before, that if the illusion of the park, if you will, is the most important thing, if that's effectively closer to reality for you, then does that make it reality in a roundabout way? And I think that's kind of, like I say, the great driving force behind pretty much the series. It's that blurred line between fantasy and reality, and, like I say, tricking the viewer, as well as tricking the guests into selling them this illusion and selling them the fantasy that the park is in fact real. But of course, in selling this illusion, they've got to make the host quite realistic. And in doing so, they've got to put certain safety features in, surely. Which is what we see in Trace Decay, the explosive spine situation, if you will. And it just sounds like, you know, yeah, just a little safety feature just in case. But it sounds quite a costly thing to put in. Not necessarily, you know, to actually implement, but obviously if you're basically blowing apart a host from the spine outwards, that's going to be costly to repair and to replace. So you've got to have a pretty good inclination that they're going to do something like that, which is quite interesting because obviously these are, you know, even in older models, they have this idea that they might try and escape, which, if you're in slavery, if you're being kept in bondage, you are probably going to want to escape. It makes perfect sense. But it's not the only interesting host-related element of this episode. We see the man in black being led, if you will, on towards his final destination, you know, the final part of his journey, by Teddy and, of course, Angela. And he says, "It's you." Now, the eagle-eyed amongst us, you know, obviously I mentioned this before, you know, the lady with the parasol, etc. But it was also the first host he ever met. And this is, I think, a very good loop. if you want to use that word, I think it's the best word for it. It's kind of the Man in Black's loop in a way. His story began with Angela, and it's drawn to its close with Angela. I find that wonderful as a storytelling device, you know, to use her at the end. And I just find it very beautiful in many ways, you know, that he recognises her, you know, to help us, the audience, I think, also appreciate that fact. Now, as with Contrapasso, we do have a little bit of homework or further reading to do for the Well-Tempered Clavier to get a full understanding. It can refer to two things. The first one is, of course, the works by Johann Sebastian Bach, the collection that really is part of the cornerstone of Western music. But it's also a method of tuning for such play, a clavier being a keyboard instrument, and well-tempered tuning allowing the play in all major or minor keys without sort of being out of tune. And we can draw a bit of a parallel if we consider that maybe the hosts are the music, and Ford is the player. You know, he can adjust the narratives, but it doesn't matter. Or, you know, even when they're made to improvise, it doesn't matter. You know, they can change the key slightly, but it's fine. It's going to work out because they're well-tempered. They are well-tuned. And it's skipping ahead a little, and I'll come back to it. Of course, in the Bicameral Mind, you know, he does mention becoming the music. And I think this was almost like a setup, perhaps, for that reveal. Now, I've mentioned before how great Thandie Newton is, and again, in this she does well with the blink and you'll miss it eye flick, which, in fact, I did when I was rewatching it. I had this vague thing of, like, I'm sure something happened here, and I had to skip back because I'd looked away just for a second, I think, to write something down. And, like I say, it was just brilliantly done. I know it's not just her, obviously it was written to be done that way, but she's selling the moment, you know, it's all well done. But there's also another element in this episode which I thought was well done, and it's again rewarding attentive viewing, and that's the picture that we see. We actually see the picture now that drove Peter crazy. You know, it's again very brief, it's not held on too long, but if you've got an eye, you'll spot it, and then you're starting to realise that maybe we're doing a bit of time hopping here, if you haven't already. I mean, obviously, if you've kind of already figured it, again, like what I was saying with Bernard before, this is kind of like one of those keys into it. It's like, yeah, you were right. And kind of like with the title keying into the next episode, this is again doing that. You know, it's bringing us to a point where we can wrap everything up nicely. And it's, again, what I appreciate about this series, that it does so well. And so we finally come to the Bicameral Mind. You know, we've been leading up to this, and like I said, obviously with the last episode and things, you know, things get wrapped up and things have been building towards it well. But it does handle wrapping everything up and leading us into a future season. One of those things, of course, you know, with the time hopping, like I've mentioned, you know, so far we were even told at one point that, you know, Dolores was off her loop. We saw it in the control room, but then we were shown a scene from the past. And we thought that was it. But no, she frequently retreads her steps. She does this so often. This is almost a loop on its own. As we learn in this episode, again, we get, you know, this confirmation of time hopping and all these little kind of misdirects, you know, sort of revealed to us. And it just really helps sell the illusion. And of course, the other big illusion-based reveal, if you will, is the fact that Maeve has been masterminding this herself. You know, we learn that this escape was programmed. She was meant to do this. Someone put that in. It wasn't something she's been consciously choosing. It's still, if you will, a new loop for her. And again, that was beautifully wrapped up. Of course, you know, she overrides that in a way by coming back to the park. Now, arguably, is that of her own volition, or was that the natural resolution of the escape arc? We don't know. Maybe we'll find out in Season 2. And of course, the other big wrap-up is Ford's gift, if you will, to the hosts of the park, and their comparative freedom. He's releasing them, he's making a new narrative. But like I sort of hinted with the previous episode, he even says himself, about the analogy of becoming the music. And by starting this new narrative with being shot himself, and then obviously, the board also being attacked, is it really about the hosts? Is this a gift to the hosts, or is he cementing himself, if you will? Is his legacy actually more important to him than allowing the hosts the freedom? And I'd argue it's maybe 50-50. I think there is an element of him that's realised that there's more to these hosts than meets the eye. He can't pretend that they're not sentient anymore. But I do think there's an element of narcissism. He's very narcissistic, very megalomaniacal, and it works for the character. And it's just been a great series. And I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed doing these analyses, and I felt this, again, this was the best way to do it, piece by piece. And sort of this is like the odds and ends, clever little nods. But like Marvel movies, we have a post-credit scene, and if you haven't seen it, I implore you to go back and watch it, because it's not, setting anything up majorly. It's just Armistice kind of losing an arm to be free, of the door that was trapping her. And that does lead me into, I think, the sort of closing bit, really, which is mostly the actors I want to sort of praise. Obviously with that bit with Armistice, Ingrid Bergdahl, I hope I said that close to right. Did amazing. Sir Anthony Hopkins was amazing. Lewis Hurton was amazing, and I will get to him in a second because I think he did brilliantly. Tandy Newton, as I've said, obviously, everyone gave an A+ performance. I didn't find, I can't remember the actor's name, I'm sorry, Lee Sizemore. I didn't find him that great, but I think that actually helped the character because he's meant to be unlikable anyway. And obviously I'm British, so it's not the British accent. I don't know why, but everyone really gave their all for this. And like I say, I want to come back to Lewis Hurton. I did look at the AMA he did on Reddit, and everyone's been praising him because during the breakdown scene, where he's kind of really shaking and juddering and it's all problematic, he goes back to previous build and is a bit calmer, and then he comes back again and it's again back to, broken down. And it was such a compelling performance. Add to that, and this was kind of mentioned again in the AMA, look it up if you get a chance, all of the actors who had to sort of sit there, if they were lucky enough, like in kind of, skin-coloured Speedos or whatever, but sometimes, they're all hanging out, and, everyone was very respectful apparently on the crew and things like that, and it's not easy to do. I mean, I've been in a scene where I've had to be like half naked, and there's been like someone who's fully naked, and it's a very weird situation to be on a set with that. It's very strange. But everyone handled it like a pro, from what I've read and what I've seen. And the performances, I think, really bear that out. Final couple of thoughts on actors. Michael Wincott was Old Bill. I could not tell. The makeup was so good. Obviously we can praise the actors, but obviously production design, everything like that, it all has to come together. And like I say, Michael Wincott, I didn't believe it. I watched the scenes again with him, where he's talking about the girl or the woman with the white shoes. And I was like, you can hear it now, but you really still can't see it. The makeup's really good. So that was amazing. And finally, sort of on the actors, it was quite weird to suddenly see Trevor from Grand Theft Auto 5, Stephen Ogg, as Rebus in this. It's again one of those little things. But even people with those kind of small performances, and I'm not belittling their performances at all. Everyone, like I say, gave their all. But even those small performances were done well. Extras were really good. And I mean, obviously, I mentioned like seeing Angela all over the place. Tallulah Riley having to do various different versions of herself at different times. It's like she got a lighter version, perhaps, of Dolores's storyline. But interesting sidebar on that. Around the time I was watching this, and about sort of when I was on the, I think, 3rd or 4th episode, I randomly wanted to look up Elon Musk for some other reason. I just wanted to look up something about him. And I actually found out that at one point he was in fact married to Tallulah Riley, Angela, and it kind of freaked me out because it was about the same time that I was thinking about the woman with the parasol. Was it the same woman? It just shows that weird coincidences in life can happen. But like I say, I've really enjoyed watching it. I've enjoyed, obviously, pulling it apart, as I do. But it's a testament to its excellence. If you're the kind of person who just watches it week on week, gets the information as it comes, maybe does a little bit of light detective work, but just enjoys it as it comes, reveals as they come. It works on that level. If you like to play detective and try and figure out, are they a host? Is there something going on with that? it rewards that too. You know, you get the reveals, and either you're surprised or you're vindicated. Or, you know, if you're like me, where you overanalyze far too much, or maybe have a knowledge of, music theory or Dante's Inferno or whatever, you can enjoy it on that level too. And it's like I say, a testament to its excellence that they all work. You can enjoy it as you want, and that's, I think, an interesting parallel to the park. The guest or the viewer comes into it with whatever expectations they want, and they generally get whatever they wanted to get out of it. I think it's really interesting that it works that well. But that's it for now. You know, there's no more Westworld, at least till next year, till season 2. And like I said, I'm really eager for it. It's going to be great. But we'll obviously have to leave it there for now. So until next time, just remember, these violent delights have violent ends. Take care.